you used to come by our podcasts when we had a podcast over at Coach's Tavern, and now it's like you're the wise sage voice of reason here. Like you teach kids, and this is a big professional setup, and I've got a donut t-shirt on.
And we are rolling. Time for another episode of Cash's Top 5. It's going to be a fun one today. My buddy Jason Hammer joining us, co-host of the Hammer and Nigel show, afternoons during the week on 93.1 WIBC here in Indianapolis. Also a contributor, I think you're a host of You Bet on 107.5, The Fan here in Indy as well. It's tough to keep all of the titles and the contributions and the hosting that you do. You do lots of stuff here in Indy. How you doing, man?
Man, I'm doing great. Thank you for having me. You look great. At first, I thought I was speaking with John Stamos. You look fantastic. But it's been a little bit because you used to come by our podcasts when we had a podcast over at Coach's Tavern. And now it's like you're the wise sage voice of reason here. Like you teach kids, and this is a big professional setup, and I've got a donut t-shirt on.
Yeah, well, the roles have reversed a little bit, I guess. Unfortunately, mine is not nearly as fun. It's not a bar cast. I didn't have a limo pick you up. We're doing this from our homes. So no, I do appreciate you taking the time to come on because we have a very fun one today. And I usually let the guest pick what topic we're going to rank, do the top 5. And you were very passionate about this. You had the list like ready to go. What are we going to rank today?
Today, we're going to talk about the best TV sitcom neighbors, okay? Because if you're going to have a successful TV sitcom, you need to have a couple of things. You need to have a very cheesy jingle that's your theme song, and you have to have a wacky / awesome neighbor. And we're going to break down the neighbors today. Okay,
now this is a fun list because you had to kind of go back. I had to go back through and Google lists of sitcom neighbors and revisit some shows maybe I hadn't seen in a while. And I was like, oh yeah, that's a great one. And I was like, oh, I remember her. I hated her. And stuff like that. And there's a little bit of a generation gap. I believe you're more Gen X and I'm more millennial. So there may be some shows that didn't quite bridge the gap for us. So I'm curious to see what will make your top 5 versus what makes my top 5. Our favorite TV sitcom neighbors of all time. Let's go ahead and kick it off. Hammer, what's your number 5?
Okay, now before we get into this, I just want to say that this could be a top 25 list. There's a lot of people we left off the list. Yeah. Folks that are watching this that are like my dad's age are going to be upset because I left off like the Mertz family, Gladys Kravitz from Bewitched,
Eddie Haskell.
The black and white era folks did not make my list. This is just for me. But coming in at number 5 for me, and this is kind of right around the time I started watching television, but you can see it on reruns, Larry from Three's Company. Now, let me tell you why. Because if you ever remember Three's Company, there was no better actor on the planet at the double entendre than Jack Tripper was, right? And his wingman was Larry. So anytime Larry showed up on the set, something cool was about to go down at the Regal Beagle, which happened to be the bar underneath the apartment complex. And the whole premise of the show is that Jack, this horny straight guy, is living with these 2 hot chicks, but he has to act like he's gay because the landlord didn't approve of that. This is a show you can never, ever make in today's society. But the double entendres they used to pull off, and the fact that Larry would just show up out of the blue, like wearing nothing but like a bath towel and a robe and go, Jack, there are twins at the Regal Beagle. We got to get there now. They just run down there and they're drinking, they're picking up chicks. Every episode that featured Larry was fantastic. And that's my number 5.
That's a great pick. I cannot believe, honestly, that Larry is not higher on your list. I honestly was waiting for him to be like number 1. So I can't wait to see what you've got.
That's how good the list is.
Yeah, it's a testament to how great the characters are, which I think you will probably agree with my number 5 pick for you. Could be higher on some people's lists, but my number 5 is Kramer, Cosmo Kramer from Seinfeld. To your point, to have a successful sitcom, you have to have that cheesy jingle. But more importantly, you have to have the crazy neighbor or the cast of characters. And people are, TV critics and writers and TV fans have always wondered, what made Seinfeld so successful? How did they get that lightning in a bottle? And I think a lot of sitcoms make the mistake of the star needs to have all of the attention, all of the lines, the brilliance of Seinfeld is Jerry is just a guy, and the cast of characters around him and his just reaction to George or to Kramer or to Elaine, that's what makes the show so great. He's the straight man.
Right.
You're taking one of the funniest men in America, and he's the straight guy, to use a vaudevillian term, which I think is brilliant. I don't think enough sitcoms do that. But anyway, Kramer is the guy. I love having that level of openness. Like, he can just walk in. They don't lock doors in sitcoms, but he's got a key to the apartment. Always has a scheme. It's never a dull moment with a guy like Kramer in your life, because he's the guy that you can't believe what story he's going to tell when you get together. Every time you get together outside of a neighbor setting, like if you go and have dinner with a friend and you catch up and you're like, what the hell have you been up to, man? And he catches you up, and it's always a different story, and there's a new chick and there's a new job. And I don't know, an incredible character.
Yes, I'm with you on that. He's on my list. That's a little tease. We'll get to that here in just a moment, but he's definitely on my list. And the writing in that show, Larry David, I get into a fight with my coworker Nigel all the time. He will argue to me that Curb Your Enthusiasm is funnier than Seinfeld, to which I just can't get behind that.
I'm with you. I appreciate Curb Your Enthusiasm's writing, but I am one of those people, I can't stand cringe moments or secondhand embarrassment moments. And that show is just full of them. And I have to look away. I can't handle the cringe factor. At least in Seinfeld, it's in this more warm, sitcom, more you're laughing at them and not appalled by what's happening, which is what I get with Curb. So I'm definitely with you there.
All right. So number 4 on my list, this is Wilson from the TV show Home Improvement. This was the Tim Allen iconic role, early 90s. Pam Anderson was on for a couple seasons as the token hot chick that did the Tool Time show. But the sage voice of reason, second time we've said that today, is the neighbor Wilson. And you only saw him from the nose up, and he had the bucket hat on. And anytime Tim Allen had to figure out what's going on with his family, what's going on with life, he turned to the old grizzled veteran that lived next door, and it was Wilson. And you never saw his face. You didn't know what he looked like, but you knew the voice. And every time he came on, you're like, oh, this guy's got something important to say. I need to listen, because this is probably going to wrap the entire episode up together.
Yeah, there's something cozy about howdy ho, neighbor. You're right. Safe at home. There's a level of comfort and familiarity there. Shout out to Tim Allen. My dad is not a fan, and I think it's because he might be too similar to Tim Allen, both from Michigan, both kind of, Midwestern Joe, average Joe type guys. But when you talk about having a career, and I'm kind of deviating from Wilson a little bit, but in 1995, 94, 95, I don't think anybody's had a better year of their life than Tim Allen. He had the number 1 book in the country. He had the number 1 movie in Toy Story. He had the number 1 show in Home Improvement. So just a quick little, talk about, failing upwards after, a big drug bust and felony arrest. But,
right.
I guess
and he didn't work like weed or anything like that. We're talking about some of the hard stuff that he got busted with. And you're right. Look at the dude's career. If he never makes another movie again, the royalties from the Home Improvement franchise, and don't forget a number of Christmas movies, the Santa Claus movies, Christmas with the Cranks, the Toy Story franchise. I mean, you can put his line of work up with just about anybody's. Sold out comedy tours, comedy albums. I mean, that's a guy kind of along the line of Jeff Foxworthy that has accomplished everything.
Absolutely. Yeah. And maybe he has Wilson to thank for some of that. Maybe some of that seeped in the early 90s. My number 4 for you, and I'm curious if this will be where the generation gap shows up a little bit. But my number 4 is Steve Urkel. I was an 80s baby, but a 90s kid. And he's like the stereotypical nerd, the suspenders, the flooded jeans, the nasally voice, all that. very archetypal. But there's so much heart in that character for being as goofy and disruptive as he was. You know, I was never a huge fan of the feel-good, cheery, warm, let's all hug moments on Full House. But every sitcom has them. You know, the what did we learn today, children kind of moment.
Right.
But when that happened on Family Matters, it was, hey, we all have feelings. We all are trying our best. And Urkel was just this tragic guy. I'm making this way deeper than it needs to be for a sitcom. But as a guy who has pined for the girl before and fallen short or been ignored or whatever, there's a lot of commiseration. There's a lot of, you know, reverence there for that character. Urkel was just had a heart of gold. He loved. It wasn't necessarily his fault that he was such a klutz and such an agitator, to the point where he was trying to change himself into Stefan Urkel just to get Laura. I don't know. I really enjoyed his vibe and it made me laugh.
No, and again, teaser, he's on my list as well. So the generation gap isn't that big.
Okay,
I
it
could have
bridges.
done without the Stefan Urkel moments because clearly that showed to me, and you see this with a lot of great sitcoms, that the actor wants to expand the role. I don't want to be known as nerd and blah, blah, blah. That's what was great with Seinfeld. There was never a moment where Jason Alexander said, you know, I want to expand George's role. No, do what you do, then go out on a high note. The Big Bang Theory made that mistake. Urkel made that mistake. Actors that think they're bigger than the show and they want to make some big dramatic Academy Award winning scene out of a 30-minute sitcom where you're on a Friday night and people are watching in their underpants.
I call that the Kirk Cameron effect. It's where the star gets a little too much power. All of a sudden, they're an executive producer. All of a sudden, they're maybe directing an episode, and it's like, save that. All right, do that post Growing Pains. Go on to do whatever you want, but let's leave Mike Seaver alone, okay, pal? That definitely happened multiple times throughout TV history. We've got Larry Dallas. We've got Wilson. What do we got at number 3 for you?
Number 3 for me, this is a show that's been on for a long time that's still running, Ned Flanders from The Simpsons. Okay. Ned Flanders is your neighbor that deals with a lot of problems with Homer Simpson, but nothing bothers the dude. His wife has died. He cowboyed up and he moved on. He's been fired. He's been bankrupt. His house has been on fire, but yet the dude's got a heart of gold. And this is how you know a neighbor is great in a sitcom. If there's an episode that features them and it's predominantly them for the running time and you're still entertained by it and even look forward to more episodes about that person, then that is a great show. That's a great neighbor. I could watch a Ned Flanders spinoff probably and be entertained by it because he's just the Bible thumping, ridiculous guy. But the way that they built on that character, they made him like a brick blank house, right? When he takes his shirt off, he's stacked and he's always the voice of positivity. And, you know, and at the end of the day, Homer still cares about Ned Flanders, even though he calls him stupid Flanders all the time. So for that very reason, I put Ned at number 3.
See, I don't have Flanders on my list, and it's hard to argue the points you've made. That's a really good debate. I don't have a rebuttal other than a neighbor like that would always make me feel bad about myself, so I don't like them. Like,
well, if you're Homer Simpson, you feel bad about yourself no matter what you do. You know, let's be honest. You know, a crackhead could move next door to Homer Simpson. He's probably still going to feel bad about himself, but Ned is just such the voice of positivity, and it's the great balance between him and Homer.
That's true, and I will say this about Flanders: you know, kind of an effect of his character is he's been so memeable through the years. That's kind of how people interact now. We're back to caveman drawings where we interact with pictures back and forth. But Flanders has some great ones. You know, if somebody posts something a little salacious and it's his Christ is watching, you know, I crack up every time I see that meme. It makes me laugh every time.
And he's got a catchphrase too. Like that's another thing that puts him in the top 3 on my list. Urkel, you know, had a catchphrase. Did I do that? And Flanders with the Oakley Dokley. I mean, that relates to a great character.
That's an excellent point. That's very good. And we're going to segue that into my number 3, who was your number 4, is Wilson. You know, the Heidi Ho neighbor. He has the catchphrase, and all the things you said. We, growing up, we didn't have close neighbors. My family, it was me and my younger sister, and we didn't have the best neighbors. We were just kind of isolated in our neighborhood. It's typical cul-de-sac, and on the east side. And so to have that sage, wisdom, to use your term, living next door in this really nice guy, this kind of a Mr. Fix-It, which I think was always kind of a subtle jab at Tim Allen, because Tim Allen was always screwing everything up on the Tool Time show. He was not a handyman, but Wilson was always just really good at doing things, and they never really talk about it. At least I can't remember them ever being like, hey, you're working on this and it's working. Or he always had a different hobby. Like he was a beekeeper at some point. He was always doing random stuff. Wanted that neighbor so bad.
Yeah. Yep. I can't argue with any of that. And on both of our lists. And my number 2 is somebody that's on your list as well. And this is Steve Urkel. Urkel is my silver medal winner on my list. And we've already broke down all the reasons why. He checks all the boxes, right? It's a complete offset of what the main characters are. Main characters are these cool folks living in the Chicago suburbs. They're middle class. They're not the richy rich kids, but they're pretty cool. And then there's this neighbor next door that's got his pants pulled up high. He's got the suspenders. He wants to date the daughter. He's got this geeky voice. But every time he came on the scene, he owned that scene. And he had the catchphrase, and people wanted to see Steve Urkel on the show. They wanted to see him do well, and they wanted to see him with the main characters. And when you go down all that, list of things there, he checks every box of what would make a great TV neighbor.
Well, and you're right. How impressive is it that, he was supposed to be just this fringe character that maybe popped up from time to time, like a Larry Dallas, and no, he came on and commanded so much, and people loved him so much that they were like, oh, this is our main character. So instead of he didn't show up till episode 4 of season 1, and then he would pop up randomly. And then he was, by season 2, first episode of the premiere, he was in the main cast. I mean, they're like, we gotta really put this kid up, on a pedestal and really showcase him for this show.
Right.
That's impressive. I don't know that a lot of, fringe characters or neighbor type characters get that love. I think that's pretty cool.
And this is how you've had an effect as a character on a show, when people dress up as you for Halloween. And people still to this day will dress up as Urkel for Halloween. Like you'll get, older trick-or-treaters, or maybe even their parents now, that show up with the kids that have the Steve Urkel starter kit on, the suspender and the flood pants and all that stuff.
It's true. My number 2 for you, again, I had Kramer, Urkel, Wilson. We've had a little bit of crossover so far, which is cool. I wasn't sure what to expect with that. My number 2 could be my number 1 for a few reasons, but there's a lot of nostalgia with number 1. My number 2 is Winnie Cooper. When we talk about neighbors we wish we had, no offense to, I call him my brother, my best friend, Mark. We grew up 3 doors down from each other. That's where the clip of the band would play, 3 Doors Down, Kryptonite, if we could put music on YouTube. But no offense to Mark, but if I could swap him out for a Winnie Cooper in a heartbeat. I mean, just the girl next door, literally. First crush. I mean, I remember watching The Wonder Years and being like, who is this goddess? And why does this punk Kevin get to hold her hand and get to date her or whatever? And then Danica McKellar turns out is a math genius and gorgeous and wonderful person. You're like, oh God, she's just like the ultimate. I want to be with that chick. Super nice, heart of gold. That's the girl you want to date. That's the girl you want to have on your street, hold hands and make out after the fireworks on the 4th of July. Winnie Cooper is my number 2.
Yeah, and it takes everybody back to when they were around that age too, right? Because everybody, when they start getting those feelings, that one chick, or if there's females watching this, whoever, the dude or whatever, that, you had a thing for. and you worked hard and maybe you were shy and you had all those awkward feelings going on, and Kevin had those. There was a lot of all of us in Kevin knowing that this smoke show chick who lives in the neighborhood is there for you. The thing that really drives me nuts, though, and it has nothing to do with the characters, it just makes me feel incredibly old. If you look at the timeline of that show came on around what, 85, 86, around that timeline, and it's 20 years prior. So if you were to redo that show today, you're talking about life in 2001.
Oh my God.
Right? If you redid a Wonder Year show today, you're talking about life in 2001.
What does that say about our culture that I would have absolutely no interest in seeing something like that? Like there was some interest in the music and the culture, the counterculture of the 60s. That was kind of a quick retrospective, but imagine watching a show about 2001. Obviously the terror attacks would really create a terrible bent to that, but just society outside of that, kids playing online, not going outside, riding their bikes, with the advent of internet, and then phones are not too far down the line,
Right. Nobody would be on their phone all the time, but I think my life would still be pretty much the same. I would be working in radio. I'd be drinking and watching the Cubs games, and that's pretty much about it. Other than getting on my phone once in a while and having kids, that's it.
Yeah. Hoping for a Winnie Cooper next door.
Right.
All right, man. We've reached the pinnacle. These are our favorite TV sitcoms, neighbors of all time. Larry Dallas, Wilson, Ned Flanders, Steve Urkel. Who do you have at number one?
And again, hat tip to all the folks, the black and the white era. Send your mean tweets at Hammer and Nigel. That's fine. But this was just my list, shows that I watched. It's somebody that was on your list. That's my number one. And that's Cosmo Kramer from Seinfeld. And the reason that it's my number one is you look at what a monster Seinfeld was. Some would argue that it's the greatest sitcom ever because it walked off on a high. The final episode wasn't all that great, but people wanted more seasons of Seinfeld. And the actor said, nope, that's it for me. We're going to walk out of here while we're still on top. People still wanted more of the show. And every scene that Kramer was in, people talked about it. Kramer was the character where people would go to work or school the next day and they would quote things. They would try to slide into the room the way that he did, or style their hair the ridiculous way that he did. And the episode called The Contest, where he just slides in the room, puts the money down, I'm out. I'm out. That right there, the applause that you got from the audience, the laughter, the fact that people can still remember that off the top of their head makes him my number one seed.
That's a great pick. I mean, all the things you said, and when you think about it, when you have like a bottle episode where it's kind of self-contained, it's kind of small. If you had an episode without George, or if you had an episode without Elaine, and it was more these one or two character centric, you wouldn't really notice, I don't think. I mean, there was always like the A story, the B story, and then the C story when everybody's getting into, and they just kind of mix and match who's with who. But if you were to have a Kramer-less episode, I don't know that I would be all that fascinated in it, because he was always the, if Elaine is dealing with something with Putty, or if Jerry and George have a scheme or whatever, there was always Kramer to kind of be the dessert or the other thing going on, to kind of be like, well, this is also going on.
Right.
And that speaks to how strong that character is. I mean, so funny. And really, it's a throwback. When we say, hat tip to the black and white crowd, the Dennis the Menace, the Leave It to Beaver crowd, his physical comedy transcends generations. We're talking,
right.
I wasn't a huge Stooges fan. It just wasn't my thing. But I have an appreciation for the Charlie Chaplins, the Buster Keatons of the world, that were able to do these really impressive things when you didn't have special effects. They were really doing, like when the house falls down, or, when the train's coming, there's some trickery, but there's some impressive. And so his physical command of that soundstage, of that TV set, is just incredible.
And when I look back at my favorite episodes of Seinfeld, if I put a list together of my 10 favorites, I'm going to get some George episodes. I might get some Jerry episodes, but a lot of it's Kramer. The Kenny Rogers roasters, getting fired from the job that he's not even really working at. These are the kind of things, these are the kind of moments that put him at the top. The success of the show, the memorable moments, the physical features, put it all together. That's my gold medal winner right there.
It's a great pick. My number one for you, a recap, I had Kramer at 5. I had Steve Urkel, Wilson. Winnie Cooper was my number 2. And my number 1, and this is where probably the generational gap will show a little bit, is my number 1 is Mr. Feeney from Boy Meets World. There's just something about that, the wise neighbor next door, but he was also more than that, where Wilson was really detached. You couldn't see his face, and he only showed up randomly. And Feeney was always there. Feeney was their principal. He moved on went to the high school and became the principal there. He was a teacher there. It's a way to keep the character in the show, but he kind of follows them to college. I've always really enjoyed coaching. I've always really enjoyed having a father figure to look up to. I have a great dad. My Uncle Phil is like an older brother to me. My old boss, Boomer. I had several teachers in high school, Mr. Reed, Mr. Salemi, Mr. Komisky. I looked up to a lot of really great dudes, and I've been really lucky to have them in my life. And Mr. Feeney was kind of the embodiment of that. Even when you're like 16 and you want to punch him in the face, you get those hormones going. You're like, just get out of my face.
Right.
Still there, still with the wisdom, all the love, just wants the best for you. Sorry to end this on such a warm, fuzzy kind of thing. No. But he also had some great lines too. There were some zingers, especially in the early years when Corey was, in middle school or whatever he was, 12, 13 years old. And he had a smart ass comment. Feeney was there to cut him down. I really enjoyed that. So yeah, shout out William Daniels. I think he's still alive, which is amazing. I think he's like 86 years old. Mr. Feeney's my number 1.
And for me, because again, I'm 43, so I probably got about a good 10, 15 years on you. I grew up knowing him as the voice of Kit on Knight Rider.
Yeah, exactly.
So, and here's what I've taken from your list. Was Winnie Cooper number 2 on your list, did you say?
Yeah.
You spent a lot of time watching the Savage Family. The Savage Family, Fred Savage, who was the star of The Wonder Years, and number 1, his brother Ben Savage, Boy Meets World. So I feel like the Savage Family owes you something. They need to send you at least a cheap basket, some sort of thank you card, an autographed picture of Winnie Cooper today or then. Either one works, but I feel like they owe you a little something.
That is an excellent point, man. Yeah, I didn't even think about that, but you're right. Absolutely. That's funny. Did so were there any honorable mentions, anybody that didn't quite make the list? Or were there any neighbors that you absolutely hated?
The neighbors that I hated were probably the ones that they brought on toward the end of a show just to try to save it. Like when a sitcom's on the leg, they'll either do a couple things. They'll bring in a new kid, or they'll bring in another neighbor or something like that. When you look at the lineup of those like mid-90s, early 2000 sitcoms, they all pretty much had the same formula, right? There really wasn't a whole lot of difference between Full House, Family Matters. There was that one show, Step by Step, with Suzanne Summers, where Cody was, instead of being the nerdy neighbor, he was the dumb neighbor, right? It was the same formula over and over again. So that's why I always gave a little bit props to those who did it first, those who were a little bit earlier in the process than somebody who comes along and just steals the formula.
No, that's a good point. Yeah, that when they introduce the new character, sometimes it's also a kid. They'll introduce a little kid, and it's like, okay, I'm over the show now. I'm not interested in what they have to say or what's going on.
Married with Children was another show that I was probably around 10, 11 when that show first came out. Al Bundy, Peg Bundy, one of the shows that really got Fox off the ground. If you think about the early days of Fox, it was The Simpsons, Married with Children, and Cops and America's Most Wanted. That was the big 4 that kind of lifted them up to big boy status. The neighbors on Married with Children were fantastic. There was the Rhodes family, and then after he left, they brought in Jefferson Darcy.
Marcy Darcy is on my honorable mentions list because of the back and forth with her and Al. Some of the best one-liners in TV history were on that show because of Marcy and Al.
I liked it actually better when the Darcys replaced the Rhodes, because Jefferson Darcy, Ted McGinley, who's Mr. Soap Opera, Stan Gable from Nerds, good-looking guy, comes in, And like he wants to bond with Al, as to where Rhodes wants to kind of just keep his distance. But the bonding with Al and them going out to the no ma'am meetings and all things like that, that was better episodes. That was better TV.
100%. I also had an honorable mention for Penny on Big Bang Theory. Now, depends on how you want to look at it. She's obviously a main character. You can make an argument that she's probably the second main character next to Leonard. But for the same reasons as Winnie Cooper. How do you not want her to be your neighbor in an apartment
Right.
building or next door? Like, yeah, sign me up. I'm in.
Right. 100%.
Yeah.
And the thing that always made me laugh is I get these guys are smart and they're probably making a lot of money, but there's no way that all of those nerds are hooking up with all those hot chicks, right? I mean, let's be realistic. Maybe one outkicks his coverage, but Leonard's with Penny. You've got Wallowitz with his wife, the short little girl with the high voice and the big hands. Bernadette. They all outkick their coverage. I'm like, come on.
Sitcom magic, baby. Sitcom magic. That's how Kevin James ends up with Leah Remini. That's how that happens, man.
Right.
Well, dude, excellent list. This was a fun trip back down TV memory lane. If you're looking for something to binge, these shows are incredible. You can find them, I'm sure, on all the streaming platforms. So Hammer, thank you again for taking the time. You're a lot of places in the digital space and in the TV space and the radio world. Where can people find you? Where can they follow you? Give us all the good stuff.
Sure. And thank you so much for having me. This was a lot of fun. I've been watching a lot of these episodes. I saw Kylie Conway do her show and it's like, oh man, I can't wait to do mine. So thank you for having me.
Of course.
Monday through Friday, 3 to 7 p.m. I do the Hammer and Nigel show, 93 WIBC, news talk radio. So we're going to give you the big stories of the day, but we're also going to do a lot of poop jokes. I mean, that's just kind of the best that we do. It's not your parents' news talk radio. So we have a lot of fun with that. I do a sports betting program every Thursday night on 107.5 The Fan from 7 to 8. It's called You Bet with Bet Rivers. I use my experience as a casino employee and my contacts in that world to try to make some cash for our listeners. And we're going to have a TV sports betting show starting in late August on Wish TV, all Indiana bets. It's myself, comedian Scott Long, and the lovely Mackenzie, who is their entertainment host over at Wish TV. We'll kind of do the radio version of the sports betting thing on the TV. And it's going to be rough for Mackenzie not being the best looking one on that show.
Yeah, she's not used to that. She's going to have to learn.
Right.
Second fiddle, baby. Come on, get in the back.
So that's it, man. You can follow me on social media, a couple places, at Hammer and Nigel. That's the show account. Personally, at Jason Allen Hammer, ALAN, Jason Allen Hammer. That's my personal Twitter. Hammer and Nigel shows on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, all that kind of stuff.
Fantastic. Well, I appreciate it, man. Good luck to you. I can't wait to see that show. You said that kicks off in August. Is that right?
Yeah. Like the final week of August when college football gets going. And we're going to do it Saturday, Sundays to get you ready to go.
Awesome. Hammer, appreciate it, dude. We'll talk to you soon, bud.
You got it, man. Thank you.